They say fortune favors the bold, but in Silicon Valley's startup ecosystem, it had become something far worse: predatory, calculated, and cruel. For 5 years, a hidden network of founders had perfected the art of destroying lives with a business plan, training young CEOs to see employees as expendable resources rather than human beings. They thought they had the perfect recruit in Madison Sterling, 28 years old, Stanford MBA, and willing to learn their playbook of exploitation. Then, one Tuesday morning, she fired James Rodriguez. What she couldn't see was that this single act would land her in front of Victor Chen, the billionaire investor who had turned his own bankruptcy from corporate fraud into a masterclass in exposing startup corruption. The man they called the Hammer, because in his boardroom, accountability wasn't just expected, it was inevitable. Now, as her carefully constructed empire crumbles under the weight of leaked documents, Madison Sterling is about to learn why exploitative founders still whisper his name when investors like Chen enter their cap tables. Before we begin, tell us in the comments from which city are you watching? And at the end, do not forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Madison Sterling adjusted her designer blazer in the floor-to-ceiling windows of her TechFlow office, admiring the morning sun's reflection. The headquarters lobby was filling up for the all-hands meeting, but she'd arrived early to show them she was always a step ahead. "First real workforce reduction," she muttered. "Time to show them what real leadership looks like." Marcus Wells, a weathered entrepreneur with 25 years in Silicon Valley, intercepted her near the break room. "Madison, got a minute? These are people with families, mortgages. Take time to understand the impact before making cuts." "With all due respect, Marcus," Madison cut in, "I graduated top of my class specifically because I understand difficult decisions. TechFlow needs to be profitable." Wells's expression hardened. "That's exactly the attitude I'm worried about." "All hands in 5 minutes," the VP of HR called out. Madison was already walking away, her Louboutins clicking against polished concrete. The meeting proceeded with routine updates until HR grew serious. "We're implementing a performance improvement plan across engineering. Make sure your metrics are solid. We're entering a critical growth phase." Madison received her target list: engineers whose termination would maximize cost savings while minimizing backlash. It was an opportunity to prove herself. Just before lunch, the meeting request appeared. Performance discussion, James Rodriguez. Madison reviewed his file. Senior engineer, 5 years at TechFlow, excellent reviews. But his salary was high, and he'd been vocal about work-life balance. Perfect candidate for optimization. The conference room was ordinary. Glass-walled, whiteboard covered in old Sprint notes. James Rodriguez sat waiting, professional despite obvious concern. "James, I'll get straight to the point. Your position is being eliminated effective immediately." James looked up, surprised. "I just shipped the payment feature ahead of schedule. My last review was excellent." This isn't about performance in isolation. It's about strategic realignment and cost optimization. "May I ask why specifically?" "My team depends on the infrastructure I built." Madison's eyes narrowed. "I'm not required to provide detailed justification. HR will escort you out within the hour." "I'm simply asking for clarification. I have equity vesting next month." "Mr. Rodriguez, are you refusing to comply with this termination?" Madison's voice rose, drawing attention from outside the glass walls. Some employees pulled out their phones. "No, I'm simply asking questions. Security will help you gather your belongings." What happened next would be debated in detail during the coming weeks. Madison saw what her preconceptions told her to see: a disgruntled employee who needed to understand his place. Minutes later, James Rodriguez was being escorted out while colleagues watched in shocked silence. Meanwhile, across town, James's wife Patricia sat in labor attorney Sarah Kim's office. James has never been fired from anything, Patricia insisted. He was 3 weeks away from major equity vesting. This doesn't make sense. Sarah reviewed the termination letter, her expression darkening. Madison Sterling. Let me check something. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Interesting. All terminations happening just before equity vesting cliffs. All senior engineers with high salaries. This isn't random restructuring. Does that help us? It might, especially since this case has been flagged for review by Victor Chen. Across town in a penthouse office, Victor Chen was already reviewing James Rodriguez's case file. The billionaire's weathered face showed no emotion as he read, but his decades of experience allowed him to spot the subtle inconsistencies. He paused on Madison Sterling's name. Jennifer, he called to his assistant, pull Madison Sterling's complete corporate history and any available footage from TechFlow today. I think we need to look at this one very carefully. The stage was set. In 72 hours, Madison Sterling would face the reckoning of her career, completely unaware that her world was about to change forever. Monday morning, Madison entered the arbitration room with her Hermes bag swinging confidently. She'd spent extra time on her appearance, power suit pressed to perfection, blonde hair meticulously styled. Marcus Wells stood in the hallway, grim-faced. Madison, last chance to reconsider. If there's anything you want to clarify. Marcus, my documentation is flawless. Victor Chen will understand we have to make tough decisions to scale effectively. You're not listening. All parties in Rodriguez versus TechFlow dynamics. Mr. Chen's arbitration is now in session. Madison flashed Wells a confident smile. Watch and learn. Inside, James Rodriguez sat with attorney Sarah Kim. His family filled the first row behind him. Madison strode to the respondents' table where TechFlow's attorney David Park waited, reviewing files with concern. Ms. Sterling, he murmured, I need to know if there's anything in the Slack messages or security footage that might contradict your report. Mr. Park, I assure you everything is documented properly. All rise. Victor Chen entered with measured steps, tall, silver-haired, dark eyes sharp and observant. Those eyes swept across the room as he took his seat. Be seated. We're here regarding the termination executed by CEO Madison Sterling. Ms. Kim, proceed. Sarah Kim stood. Mr. Chen, we move to declare this termination wrongful and request immediate investigation. We have Slack messages, security footage, and witness testimony showing Ms. Sterling escalated without cause. Objection! Madison blurted out, half rising. Victor Chen's gaze fixed on her like a laser. Ms. Sterling, in my arbitration room, objections come from attorneys, not corporate officers. Mr. Park? Park placed a restraining hand on Madison's arm. No objection to evidence presentation, Mr. Chen. We'll examine that context thoroughly. Ms. Kim, present your evidence. The lights dimmed, a large screen descended, and video began to play, footage from a colleague's phone showing James sitting calmly as Madison approached with immediate termination notice. As you can see, Mr. Rodriguez was conducting normal business when Ms. Sterling approached 3 weeks before his equity cliff. The video continued. James's calm questions, Madison's increasingly aggressive responses, her calling security before he'd made any move to leave. Now, let's compare this to Ms. Sterling's written report. Madison's official documentation appeared on screen. Her report painted James as aggressive and resistant, but the video showed something entirely different. Her own voice sounded harder, more confrontational than she remembered. Note the timestamp, Mr. Chen. Ms. Sterling claims Mr. Rodriguez exhibited insubordinate behavior for several minutes. The video shows she called security within 90 seconds. Park shifted uncomfortably. While the timing may be compressed, we maintain Ms. Sterling had reasonable business justification. About that restructuring, Kim interjected. We've analyzed TechFlow's termination patterns. 12 other senior engineers terminated in 6 months, all within weeks of equity vesting cliffs. The morning proceeded like a slow-motion nightmare for Madison. Kim presented financial projections showing TechFlow would save $4.2 million in equity through these strategic terminations. Slack messages where Madison discussed optimization targets, witnesses confirming a deliberate pattern. During a brief recess, Park pulled Madison aside. "This is bad. You told me you had business justification. They have 12 other cases with the same pattern." "They're just twisting things," Madison insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Park stared at her. "I'm recommending TechFlow settle immediately and replace you as CEO. Start thinking carefully about what you'll say when Mr. Chen questions you directly." When arbitration resumed, James Rodriguez testified with calm composure. "Had you had any previous disciplinary issues?" "No, ma'am. Never below exceeds expectations. I was being considered for principal engineer promotion." "How has this affected you?" James's composure cracked. "I used to believe that if you did good work, you'd be valued. Now I'm anxious at every job interview. I had to explain to my 7-year-old daughter why Daddy got fired. How do you explain that to a child?" For the first time, doubt crept into Madison's mind. "Ms. Sterling, please take the stand." As Madison walked forward, her practiced confidence felt hollow under the harsh lights. "Please explain why you felt Mr. Rodriguez's position needed elimination," Kim began. "TechFlow was facing competition and needed to optimize our cost structure." "Your termination report states Mr. Rodriguez was insubordinate. The video shows him asking calm, professional questions. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Madison felt sweat beating on her forehead. "I thought he was going to challenge the decision. I wanted to maintain control." "So you misrepresented his behavior in official documentation." "I wrote what I thought would—" Madison stopped. "You wrote what would justify the termination you'd already decided to make," Kim finished. "A termination timed to avoid paying $340,000 in equity." Kim pulled out an email. "How do you explain this to Marcus Wells from 4 weeks ago? Identified 12 engineers hitting vest dates in Q2. Terminating before cliff will save us 4.2 million. Board will love the numbers." The room erupted. Madison's face went white. "Is that email authentic?" Chen asked quietly. Silence stretched endlessly. Finally, barely audible. "Yes." "I don't believe everyone heard you." "Please speak up." Madison's face burned. "Yes, Mr. Chen, I sent that email. I targeted employees approaching equity vesting to reduce costs." The admission hung in the air like smoke. "Given this revelation, we adjourn for today," Chen announced. "Mr. Park, I expect TechFlow's settlement motion within 2 hours. Additionally, I'm launching a formal investigation into all terminations Ms. Sterling oversaw. Wednesday, 9 a.m., we'll discuss the broader pattern of exploitation." He turned to Madison. "I suggest you spend the intervening time reflecting on the difference between business efficiency and worker exploitation. This isn't Stanford Business School anymore, and I'm not an arbitrator who will turn a blind eye to systematic wage theft, regardless of how you dress it up in startup terminology." The next morning, tech news sites buzzed. TechFlow CEO admits to strategic pre-vesting terminations. In Victor Chen's office, the investigation expanded rapidly. Sarah Kim sat with Chen's legal team, reviewing files. "The email wasn't isolated," an investigator reported. "We found similar patterns at 7 other startups where Marcus Wells served as advisor or board member." Chen studied the timeline. Same methodology. Identify high earners approaching equity cliffs, manufacture concerns, terminate before vesting. Conservative estimate, 87 terminations following this pattern, over $23 million in equity that employees earned but never received. Chen leaned back, memories flickering. 20 years ago, I was on the other side. Different industry, same principles. Corporate fraud disguised as legitimate business. Is that why they call you the Hammer? Kim asked. Partially. When I rebuilt after bankruptcy, I made a promise. Any startup I invest in must treat workers as stakeholders, not resources to optimize away. Madison Sterling is about to learn why that promise isn't negotiable. That night at 11:47 p.m., Madison sat in her home office, searching desperately for anything to discredit Victor Chen. A news article from 2 decades ago. Entrepreneur Victor Chen cleared after bankruptcy fraud allegations. She read intently. Chen had been accused of financial mismanagement at 28 when his first startup collapsed. Though cleared, blame fell on his CFO. The investigation took months. Madison began drafting an anonymous tip to a hungry tech blogger, carefully implying Chen might harbor bias against young entrepreneurs. By morning, the blog post was live. Exclusive. Questions about Victor Chen's impartiality and TechFlow case. The piece implied dark undertones to Chen's bankruptcy, questioning whether his past created a vendetta against startup CEOs. Pro-business protesters gathered outside the arbitration building, demanding Chen recuse himself. Madison watched the chaos on Twitter, feeling desperate hope. At 2 p.m., Victor Chen stood before packed media. Madison watched via livestream, stomach churning. I want to address recent attention regarding my history, Chen began steadily. 20 years ago, at 28, roughly Ms. Sterling's age, I founded a company. Our CFO engaged in fraudulent accounting I failed to catch. The company went bankrupt. I was investigated and fully cleared, but I lost everything. He paused. What recent revelations failed to mention is what I learned. I learned what it feels like to be powerless in a system that can destroy you. I learned that authority without accountability is institutional bullying. And I learned that business efficiency used to justify human harm is just exploitation with better PR. The room was silent. Someone hoped exposing my past would discredit this investigation. They failed to understand that my experience doesn't make me biased against entrepreneurs. It makes me uniquely qualified to recognize the difference between legitimate business decisions and systematic exploitation of workers. His eyes seemed to look directly at Madison through the camera. This isn't about one CEO making one mistake. This is about a coordinated effort to normalize wage theft in the startup ecosystem. Minutes after the press conference ended, Madison's phone buzzed. Ms. Sterling, this is Deputy Director Williams from the SEC. We need to schedule questioning regarding equity compensation practices at TechFlow. Denying vested equity may constitute securities fraud. Within hours, SEC investigators served document preservation orders. The investigation expanded to include Marcus Wells and the network of advisors sharing the termination playbook. Madison sat alone in her office, reality finally breaking through her denial. A text from Marcus Wells. We need to talk. Lawyers present now. By Wednesday, the investigation had become national news. Victor Chen's arbitration room was the epicenter of a movement to reform startup employment practices. Sarah Kim presented findings. Same playbook across 6 companies, same advisors, same outcome. Workers denied millions in earned equity. Mr. Chen, this network didn't just enable Madison Sterling. It trained her, protected her, and profited from her. We've identified a consulting firm called Growth Efficiency Partners, charging startups $50,000 to implement these termination strategies. Who owns it? Chen asked. Marcus Wells holds 40%. The other 60% is distributed among startup advisors who've implemented the playbook. Madison watched her mentor get exposed as the architect of the system that had shaped her entire leadership approach. Ms. Sterling, Chen addressed her, you are responsible for your actions, but you're also a product of a system designed to turn empathy into a competitive disadvantage. He turned to the room. This arbitration will result in immediate settlement for Mr. Rodriguez. but I'm recommending SEC charges against growth efficiency partners and any startup that knowingly implemented their playbook. The settlement came quickly. James Rodriguez received full vested equity plus damages totaling $890,000. But Chen spent 3 weeks reviewing every termination Madison oversaw. Affected employees came forward one by one. Marcus Wong, 29, lost $200,000 in equity earned over 4 years. His position was eliminated, but replaced with a junior engineer at half salary 2 weeks later. Jennifer Park, senior product manager, fired 3 days before her vesting cliff, right after returning from maternity leave. The company offered $10,000 severance for equity worth $340,000. Each story followed the same pattern. "How did you justify this?" Chen asked Madison privately. "I told myself it was just business," she said quietly. "Marcus taught me empathy was weakness, that difficult decisions separated successful founders from failures. And now? Now I see I destroyed lives to hit arbitrary metrics. James Rodriguez's daughter is 7. She doesn't understand efficiency ratios. She just knows her dad wasn't good enough." Chen nodded. 20 years ago, my daughter asked similar questions. I understand the weight of that responsibility. The settlement expanded into a class action representing 87 engineers across 7 companies. Total damages, $23.4 million in denied equity, plus punitive damages. Victor Chen pushed for structural reform, independent equity vesting audits, mandatory arbitration with worker representation, SEC reporting for any termination within 60 days of vesting, clawback provisions for executive bonuses tied to questionable savings. Marcus Wells and Growth Efficiency Partners faced SEC charges. Wells resigned from all board positions. Madison was removed as TechFlow CEO. 6 months later, Madison addressed young entrepreneurs at a startup ethics workshop in Oakland. "My name is Madison Sterling, and I was removed as CEO for systematically denying workers their earned compensation." The audience shifted uncomfortably. "I want to tell you how it starts. You get advice. Be tough. Don't let employees take advantage. Then, equity is expensive. Minimize vesting. Then someone shows you a spreadsheet proving strategic terminations save millions." She described the gradual normalization of exploitation. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. What I did caused real harm. James Rodriguez's daughter will remember her father coming home in tears. I'm here because Mr. Chen gave me a choice. Spend my career preventing others from making my mistakes, or disappear entirely. I chose accountability." In the audience sat James Rodriguez, who'd accepted Madison's invitation to attend. After the session, James approached her in a quiet hallway. "Why did you do it?" Madison thought carefully. "Because I never saw you as a person. I saw a line item on a budget. The system I operated in rewarded that view, celebrated it. And now? Now I see the cost. You used to take your daughter to the park after work on Thursdays, right? I read that in your impact statement." James nodded. "I can't give you those Thursdays back, but I can make sure other founders understand the human cost before they make the same choices." At the final settlement hearing with all 87 affected employees present, Victor Chen delivered closing remarks. 20 years ago, I stood where some of you stand. Financially devastated, professionally humiliated, unsure if justice would come. One person showed me that within broken systems, there are individuals working for change. He outlined new standards, oversight mechanisms, cultural shifts needed in venture capital. The founders in this case didn't start their careers intending to become exploitative. They were gradually led down that path by a system that prioritized shareholder returns over human dignity. As we implement reforms, remember, the badge of founder is not a shield from accountability. It's a symbol of responsibility to everyone whose labor builds your vision. 1 year later, measurable changes had taken hold. 3 major venture capital firms adopted Chen's employment standards. 2 startup accelerators integrated worker protection into their curriculum. Madison Sterling worked full-time for a nonprofit focused on equitable startup practices, speaking at universities about the dangers of efficiency above ethics culture. She'd repaid her entire CEO compensation to a fund supporting affected workers. James Rodriguez returned to engineering at a company with strong equity protection. His daughter's Thursday park visits resumed, though James held her hand tighter now, more aware of how fragile security could be. Marcus Wells faced trial for securities fraud. Growth Efficiency Partners dissolved, its playbook now a case study in what not to do. Victor Chen continued his work, his reputation as the Hammer now legendary. But those close to him knew a different story, of a man who'd turned personal devastation into a decades-long mission for accountability. The story of Madison Sterling's fall and partial redemption became part of a larger conversation about startup culture, worker rights, and the true cost of disruption built on exploited employees. It wasn't a happy ending. There was too much permanent damage for that. But it was something equally important: a new beginning. The Silicon Valley playbook normalizing exploitation began to be questioned. Young founders learned that true innovation didn't require sacrificing worker dignity, and workers who built the future began to demand and receive their fair share of the value they created. In his penthouse office, Victor Chen looked out over San Francisco, remembering the young man he'd been, broken, but determined to rebuild with integrity. He thought about Madison Sterling, now walking a similar path of redemption, and hoped she'd learn what he had, that the measure of a leader isn't in how much power they accumulate, but in how carefully they wield it. The hammer had struck. Justice had been served. And in the ruins of one exploitative system, the foundation for something better was being built. What we learn from this story is that the systems we operate within can gradually normalize behavior that destroys lives. And while accountability may be painful, it's the only path that transforms both individuals and the broken structures that shape them. Because true leadership isn't measured by how much power you can accumulate, but by how carefully you wield it and how willing you are to face the consequences when you've wielded it poorly. If this story touched you, remember, you don't need to be a champion to make a difference. You need the courage to stand for what's right, the humility to admit you're wrong, and the generosity to lift others up. That is the kind of strength that changes the world. Thank you for watching to the end. If today's story touched you even a little, please hit subscribe so you won't miss new episodes every week. Which moment did you like most in the story? Tell me in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video so the algorithm knows you want more stories of justice and healing. If you're watching from a particular city, share where you're tuning in from. I'd love to see how wide our community reaches. See you next episode. A secret unlocked by a late apology. Tap the bell to get notified the moment it goes live.